Hello and welcome to this question and answer series about the thesis by publication. And today I'm going to be answering a question about what type of outputs you can include in your TBP. And the first advice that I always give is to check your institutional guidelines. Check to see if there's some guidelines. Ask around because sometimes there are guidelines available but they're not very accessible. But there might be some guidelines available to tell you what you can and what you cannot include in a thesis by publication at your institution. But what many people find is that there are no guidelines particularly on this matter, and there's a lot of flexibility, which is a good thing, but also can make it confusing as to what you can include and what you can't. So I'm going to start by showing you some data that we collected to show you what typically happens in the thesis by publication in Australia. So let me just pop. And as you can see, we have about 250 recent graduates who completed a thesis by publication doctoral degree. And they were asked what type of outputs they included in their final thesis. And you can see that almost all, except for 3, included at least one peer-reviewed journal article. Our next most common was conference proceedings, followed by book chapters. And then we have some types of outputs which are much less common, so government reports, books, online modules, etc. But you can see very clearly that there is a dominance of the peer-reviewed journal article. And we know that it holds so much value in academia today that that's probably not a big surprise. So the second thing that I would suggest is that you look very carefully at what other people are doing within your discipline. Because what we notice in our research is that many of the differences in thesis by publication are not institutional level differences. They're at the disciplinary level. So I think it was economics, accounting, those type of financial disciplines that to a significant degree were more likely to include conference proceedings, for example. So you might want to have a think about what type of outputs are valued, but also what other people within your discipline are doing, and perhaps model yourself off them. But also we think that there's room to include more outputs. We note that there is a real lean toward the more traditional types of outputs, but we would suggest that there is more flexibility to include a wider scope of outputs. We're not sure why that there is such a focus on those traditional outputs. Perhaps it's institutional guidelines, disciplinary pressures. Maybe doctoral students are reluctant to include things which are a little more modern, I guess. So things like blogs or links to YouTube videos, things that show that you are able to communicate your research beyond academia to wider audiences. This is a way that you can show at the expanse of your skills. So perhaps to consider what it is that you want to show to the examiners and what you have learned through your process of becoming a researcher, not just in the traditional sense. So we argue that there's more scope to include a wider variety of outputs, but of course we are guided by our institutional and disciplinary norms. If you have any other comments or questions that you'd like me to address, please just pop them in the comments and I'll try to answer your questions. Thank you. See you next time.